Hello, everyone. We are here to talk about hiding in the familiar, steganography, and vulnerabilities in popular archive formats. My name is Mario Vuksan, and I'm here with Tomislav Pericin. We are founders of ReversingLabs, a company that is working on file analysis and unpacking frameworks. And we have, let me raise this up. We have presented at last Black Hat open source project called NyxEngine that has become a really popular tool for file analysis. So we have been since working on some interesting technology and have in the process discovered some vulnerabilities in popular archive formats like zip, rar, GZip, cab, and 7-zip. And they're here joined with Brian Karney, who is CEO of world's leading digital forensics company, Access Data, that has helped us a lot, with putting together this research. So just to move forward on this, our goals today is to just give you really brief introduction to steganography as it relates to archives, then to give you some ideas on how we could obtain malformations inside of different file formats, and talk about their steganographic implications as well as vulnerabilities that are a natural byproduct. After that, we will move on to demonstrating some quick and dirty hex editing and how to create your own file formats by modifying the very standard stuff. And we will finish with a freeware tool that's going to be available today, which we call NyxEngine, which has been specifically designed to detect malformations in standard archive formats, and then also to detect all the vulnerabilities that we will be talking today. So our principal topic is steganography. So what that is, many of you know that. Just simply getting to the basic verbiage definition. It is the art and science of writing hidden messages in such a way that no one, apart from the sender and intended recipient, suspects the existence of the message. It's really a form of security through obscurity. It's a concept that's been around for a long time. We want to talk about, all its ancient and historic predecessors. But really, when it comes to digital stuff, it comes to this. Take one image. In this case, we will remove some bits of the color map. The result will be a black image. We will change the brightness by 85%, and then we will get a hidden message or the image, that's being buried into it. So when we're talking about steganography, it's really images. It's been historically audio, has been more recently video, but today we will really focus on archives or ways we can bury really big payloads into standard things. Steganography, or shorter for, I think we are, is this the next slide or the one before? It is the next slide. Or just, I thought we had another slide before that. Oh, we are missing one slide. All right. Doesn't matter. Anyhow, so when it comes to steganography, there is legitimate use and illegitimate use for steganography. And Stego is the word that forensics community uses for the steganographic use when looking for the so-called contraband. But steganography is also a feature of watermarking, DRM, CAP for signing movies, or more recently for embedding watermarked information inside of the medical images. And still, people talk about steganography principally for messages hiding text within the text, in images, media files. And the reason for proliferation of this is that there are over 600 different tools available today to allow you to embed material with different sorts of algorithms. Many of these things have been open source, and as such, there has been proliferation of commissioned private tools, really focused on total obscurity in embedding information, principally to evade detection that in today's world is done in really two different ways. Either you try to inventory all the possible algorithms and are looking for artifacts inside of images or media files, or you're just looking for the presence of the tools that do encryption, decryption of the data, meaning you're looking for hashes of these tools. So, as such, I'd like to invite Brian to tell you about, how does this look like in real life, today?
Thanks, Brian. So, interestingly enough, we do quite a bit of work not on identifying tools, but opening up the payload or the results of Stego's files. But as part of this project, working with the ReversingLabs team, I set out to try to find some good stories about steganography. And interestingly enough, I really couldn't find any good stories about it because we had magically gotten files at times at which we needed to look at. But it could be due to the fact that it's really not that prevalent in the wild. I don't totally believe that that's true, but it is obviously a possibility. It could be that analysts are not really looking, so they never find it, right? It's like there's so many other things. You look at a hard drive, it's got 500,000, 1 million items on there. You see a bitmap or a WAV file. What are the chances? It could be that most media-based approaches have many weaknesses. So the big thing is that when you start shoving a lot of data in some of the traditional Stego carrier files, they start to get a little bit messy. So like the images get fuzzier, the audio gets more garbled, and whatnot. So it's not a good means if you're really trying to take a fair amount of data outside of little bits and pieces and stuff like that. And that right now, the best method to identify Stego is to find the tools based off of hashes. End of story. It's pretty much sort of what they do. There's a few different hash databases out there and a few different tools and stuff like that. But right now, sort of the best method to identify Stego on a machine is to see if there's presence of a Stego tool. If there's presence of a Stego tool, there's a possibility that there's some Stego payload or there was some potential information that was Stego. So, or it could be that steganography is just so effective that nobody really knows. So new paradigms for forensic, really from an investigative perspective. Obviously, we talked about the traditional steganography is thought of just embedding data in media files, audio, JPEG, bitmap, GIFs, and stuff like that. Again, things get a little bit messy as you start to increase the payload. So if you're really going to go through the effort of taking stuff, you kind of want to probably take a bunch of stuff with you. So this really, the session is really about a new paradigm in steganography, which gets used a lot. But really there will be a shift away from the media files probably to more of the archive files, zip, cab, 7-zip, like the rest of the team is talking about. So within these archive files, why it's relevant is because you can start putting more data in there. Once you put data into these archives, you can still get stuff out. So you're like, oh, it's fine. The archive's good. So it's sort of, you don't really know unless you really start to look into these different archive files. And there's also other approaches. There's discussion about a Stego file system recently, which is basically a file system and which sort of looks like a TrueCrypt, where you basically open it up with a regular password, and then because in the UK they recently passed a law talking about you have to give up your password. So if that's the case, they would say, give me your password. You'd give them your password. It would open up. There'd be benign files, but inside that archive or that file system is a whole other set of things. So that was called the Stego file system. And then I also just read about another approach where you can take a CD file system, the CDFS like file system with the CD, and you can just jam data into the CD. But when you go to read it, it looks like a regular play and stuff like that, but you need to know to look outside of the sort of normal bounds. So investigating Stego in archives. So why this is really relevant from an investigative perspective is, one, it's easier to hide larger payloads in plain sight. I think the most relevant thing is it's not easy to identify using existing methods. So all the existing methods are like blind anomaly-based approach, looking for things that aren't the signatures, image analysis using image filters, audio analyzers, and whatnot. So those are all very much media-based approach. And then even more so, since the traditional method is finding these tools by hash, everybody's got these different archive tool, zips and unzips tools on their machines. Using hashes is silly, because it's really pointless, because what are you going to look for per se? So, and it also makes you always question what's inside the archive. All right, turn it back to you.
Hey guys, my name is Tomislav Pericin. I'm the chief software architect with the ReversingLabs. And before we continue, I'm just going to switch the slides, because I'm sure that everything we are meant to present till the end of the presentation is in here.
Yeah, move the microphone closer, or ask people can hear you.
So this is what we already talked about, and we're going to continue with the story about what we discovered and how. So if you look at the archive formats, usually you're talking about the most popular ones, and these are the ones: zip, rar, cap, 7-zip, and GZip. Now these are the files you will normally find on any operating system and any PC in the world. But if we look at them this way, you will most commonly find these first four on Windows and Unix for the GZip. But that doesn't mean that's going to be the case, because files are just binaries, and they are not binded to the operating system in any form. But we selected to split them this way because their archive processors are commonly built for these platforms. Now, first format is the zip file format, and it is most common file format in use today. What's interesting about it is that it's over 20 years old. So it was invented or created in 1986 by Phil Katz for PKZip. Of course, the format itself is fully documented, and this is very important. The documentation for this file format is 32K line text file. So if you're implementing your own solution, you really have to go through all of that. And even the most popular archive processors, such as WinZip, haven't implemented all the features. So you see, you can create a file that's legal by documentation, but it really can't be opened by a standard tool that we use today, such as the WinZip, which is the most popular zip archival program, PowerZip, WinRAR, and 7-zip, of course, which is the open source version. Now, this format supports error recovery, multi-disk spanning, encryption, and SFX. It has multiple compression algorithms, but the default one is deflate. Now, the RAR file format is a very popular one. It was developed by Eugene Rochelle, and it is partially documented. It's a technical note you get with the program, and it doesn't really contain everything you need to know about the format, but it's a place to start. So its decompression is supported by WinRAR, of course, which is its native archive processor. You can download an SDK which works with the RAR archives, but it only gives you an option to decompress the archives. You cannot compress them. And these other programs, of course. Now, this format, of course, supports error recovery, multi-disk spanning, encryption, and SFX. Those are the most common features we find in today's archive processors. Compression algorithm is a bit different, but it's based on LZ and PPMD, though it's proprietary, so that's why you need a license for it. Now, the cap file format is a very common installer format. It's very rarely used by users. It's created by Microsoft, and it's used as installer format for their platform. It is fully documented. It has a 20-page PDF file you can look at. It's a pretty detailed one. So the cap file format is, of course, supported by many software utilities, such as Microsoft Windows, who has included compressed folders, and it has support for both zip and cap files. What's interesting is that of all these tools, only Power Archiver can compress files into cap archives. And once you create a cap archive, you cannot add any more files to it, because that's how the specs work. And it supports multi-disk spanning, digital signing, and SFX. Uses 4 compression algorithms: LZX, Deflate, Quantum, and MSZip. 7-zip, as we talked, it's an open source format. It started in 2000, and it was developed by Igor Pavlov. It is fully documented. It has series of text files you can look at and see how the format looks on disk. Its native processor is 7-zip, of course. All the other tools also support 7-zip. It has multi-disk spanning, encryption, and SFX. For compression algorithm, it uses its own LZ variation called LZMA. Now, the GZip file format is most commonly found in Unix. It was created in 1992, and it is documented just by a few pages in 1996. Now, it is also supported by every known and most popular archive processor. Now, it only supports compressing single file. So if you want to compress more files, you have to bind them together with another program, usually it's star, and then compress the end result. It only uses the deflate algorithm. Now, since we know all this about these formats, we wanted to know what does it all mean? It means that all files on the file system are basically just binaries. And if you look at any file, I mean doc, PowerPoint presentation, movie, or an archive, it's just a binary you can see with the text editor and edit any bytes to your choosing. But to edit files successfully, you have to know the documentation for that particular format in order to modify the file correctly. So what are our goals when it comes to malforming files? From a steganography standpoint, we want to hide files or any messages from you, and we want to do that in a process which can be reversed. So once you've hidden something inside an archive, you must be able to retrieve it later. And from a vulnerability standpoint, we don't want to hide anything, but we want to break an archive processor. Now, this is really neat because multiple security vendors have developed their own archive processors, and since for zip we said the documentation is 32K lines long, you bet there are some things they looked over. Now, why does fuzzing doesn't apply to this scenario? Because we don't want to crash the program. We just want to break an archive processor so it just skips over a file and doesn't scan it in full. Now, how is it achieved? First and foremost, you have to know the documentation. Nothing can save you from it. You have to read the entire documentation and just think of certain features such as this is something nobody would implement, and just try that. And if that works with archive processors such as WinZip, you might want to try that with security tools. Now, documentation itself is not perfect. There are some things that are really unclear, and if you look at the zip documentation, there are sentences that really don't make no sense. So you can use that to your advantage and think of the ways how anybody would implement that. You can use rarely used fields, as I said, that is basically knowing the documentation very well. And you can combine a couple of file formats together to create this sort of a weird file we will present later when we combined zip64 format with the normal zip format, and just try to mess with the format identification so not the proper algorithms are used to decompress the archive. And of course, there's try and error method. You can just try to change some bytes and see how that works or doesn't. Now, steganography is achieved by all of the above, and you can also inject more data into the archive. Now, there were some previous works in this area. There were some archive malformation tests that were published in 2004 by iDefense, and their implications are quite nicely put by ESET. I'm going to read this. It says, the vulnerability was caused by the fact that some archive compression, decompression software, including WinZip, incorrectly handled compressed files with deliberately damaged file headers, thus in fact allowing creation of damaged archive files that would automatically be repaired on the victim's computer without notifying the user. And that's what this is really about. And this is what we focused our testing on. Now, the first thing we wanted to know is how fast and how accurately are we detecting formats. This is very important because this is the first step in processing any format. Second one is, if you get a file, you have to know if it's valid or not. And if it's corrupted, you have to know what amount of data you can recover from that. And of course, if our code was vulnerable to any of the known attacks or the future ones. And then steganography came into the picture, and we wanted to know the following. Wanted to know, is there interesting data between all these files and archives, and Even so, if there is this data, can we corrupt it? Can this data have a self-destruct button? Now, here's what we found in our tests. From steganography standpoint, we found multiple ways of hiding files in formats, and we're going to show a couple of those in our demo. They are quite nicely relating to the vulnerabilities we found. Now, from the vulnerability standpoint, we found high probability of malware detection evasion. So, anti-malware scanners affected by these 15 reported vulnerabilities, with more pending, were unable to correctly process the entire archive, and therefore were missing some of the malware packed inside it. Now, there are few types of threat level you can assign to this. You can say it's very high and it's critical, because if you are at the gateway and you want to scan all the email and all the files that come to your network, you're going to want to be able to scan everything. But if you are scanning on the desktop or your endpoints, there's a low impact, because for that malware to execute, you still have to extract it, and that's where the anti-malware scanners are going to catch it. So depending on which software security product you are looking at, the impact is either high or low. Now, we're going to go over the steganography in the zip file format only, and it's achieved by modifying the name of the compressed file inside headers. So basically just by inserting a null character in front of the first letter of the compressed file, you are able to hide files from you, but that only works for WinRAR, and other processors will show up empty file slot. Now, there are other ways you can successfully hide files from all archive processors, such as decreasing the number of packed files inside the header. So if you have the last file packed, you just decrease the number and the last file will not be registered. And we can use extra fields in the zip file documentation to camouflage some of the header data. And we can move the central directory to hide data from the start of the archive. And we can also inject new data, of course. Now, what are the implications of this steganography point? Data can, of course, be hidden in the zip archive. But data can also be hidden in the OOXML file format, which is the OpenOffice XML file format used by Microsoft Office, which is basically just a zip archive containing lots of XML files. So since this applies to zip archives, it also applies to the Microsoft Office file format. Now, this is what's important, because if we have injected data inside of it, it can self-destruct, and it can do that by the actions performed by the user. So if I would to hide a file inside a Word document and you would to open that kind of file, Microsoft Office would tell you this file was damaged. Do you want to repair it? And as soon as you do, the file, the injected steganography data is gone. The same can be achieved by the antivirus software, because if you pack a malware inside it and additionally hide some Stego data inside it, so if you're inspecting that kind of file and you have an antivirus working, it's going to say, oh, I found a malware in this, do you want to clean it? And as soon as you do, the data is gone. So from the forensic standpoint, if you are inspecting the data, you must make sure that no other tool is going to interfere with the evidence, of course. Now, the implementations we found, because we didn't really invent this, and we didn't want to create new problems, there are some implementations you can see on the internet. There's Zip Steganography by Karina John. It's published by CPOL license. It can hide multiple files inside the zip archive, which is stored just before the central directory. It can also encrypt files with the password. And there's another solution we found. It's called ZJMask by Winston Chu. It's a freeware tool. It can only hide one file inside either zip or a JPEG file. It does that by prepending the file to the archive. It also damages the file in the process, but it can be decompressed generically. So if you use software such as WinRAR, you will be able to decompress such an archive. But since that's not a valid archive, we really didn't want to bother with that. Now, we're going to disclose the 15 vulnerabilities we found. Now, before we do that, I just want to say that we acted responsibly this way, and we disclosed all these vulnerabilities to the affected vendors with association with CertFI. So let's go over them. most important thing is during our investigation, and stuff you're going to see now is mostly related to zip, but there's at least one vulnerability for each of the affected file formats. So most of these are zip. The first one is caused by extensive header modification. So what we did here is we wanted to create our own steganography implementation just to test our tool, and in the process we successfully have hidden the file, but we did extensive modification to the file header, and that's what caused the problem with some security software vendors. So here's what we did. We used central directory fields to store some information, which broke the file format intentionally, and replaced the first name of the file with 0 and erased the local header content. So that's why archive word processors in antivirus software didn't really work right. The second one was, anyone could have thought of this, but this was a cool thing to try. We partially protected an archive with a password. So we protected the first file, which is just an image with a password, and all the other files in an archive weren't protected with the password. So you can extract them normally, and some antivirus vendors wouldn't correctly process this archive. They would find the first file that was password protected, and they just thought the whole archive was. Now this one, next one is this weird hybrid file method we talked about. So this is pretty a neat thing to do. What we did is we compressed a config sample, and we created a self-extracting executable with a zip, and no antivirus in the world had a problem with this. Okay, because zip is a specific format. When you are identifying the zip archive, you are going from the end of the file. So what we wanted to do is just append another zip file to the end of the archive, to the end of the SFX file, and that's why when you are scanning the archive, you will be able only to see the last file, which was appended, and the SFX content, which was extracted normally when you started the SFX program. The compressed content was malware, of course. And some antivirus vendors went, and this was the correct way for scanning the file from the end, and that's why they only found the clean archive appended. Now, this one is one of the Stego implications to the zip archives. So there's an extra field behind every central directory entry in the zip file header, and if you use this data, which isn't really commonly used by any of the archive processors, you will be able to hide some data behind it. So by damaging the header like that and just cloaking the next item in the zip header, we were able to successfully hide malware, because antivirus software would just skip over that because they weren't processing the extra field correctly. Now, another weird file format example is, which one I mentioned earlier, is where we added some fields to the zip archive, which made it look like a zip64, but no archive processor thought it was zip64. It processed that normally. So that was an error with identifying the file format itself. Now, next one is realigning the file to the 40 hex bytes, and realigned is quoted because we really didn't realign anything. We just prepended the bytes, and that actually breaks the archive. But since the zip file format has both central and local directories, you can also extract this data generically, and software which does that is WinRAR, and it was the only one who was able to do it. And that, of course, even though this isn't a valid archive, if it's still extractable by at least one tool, antivirus vendors want to support that case as well. Now, we use the file comment field, which is exactly the same like the extra field. It's just additional data behind every entry in the header. And since this is rarely used field, and we haven't seen any of the files using this, some antivirus vendors were just confused about where the next header is and didn't really scan the whole archive. The next one is also a weird kind of format. It relates to bad compression algorithm, but it's not really bad, because specially crafted ZipX file, which was introduced in WinZip 12 version, it has a new compression for the JPEG files themselves. So if you compressed a single image, which is a JPEG with this new ZipX version, and you just rename the file to zip and use any other tool in the world to add another file inside that particular archive, we still have a valid zip file because all the headers are the same between the new file format and the old one. But it's only the compression algorithms that have changed. So when the antivirus software was scanning this, they were at the first file and saw the compression algorithm they don't support and just skip over the whole archive. Now we came to RAR file format, and this is an interesting one because the first file block inside the RAR file format defines the whole archive. It says if it's a multi-volume one or stuff like that. But it has a pretty neat feature that you can use to declare a block as a temporary one. So next time you add an archive to that particular, add a file to that particular archive, that first block will be stripped. And since it is stripped, the archive is broken. So you can use this as prevention of modifying data. We will show this in the demonstration later. But what the problem was is that the first 8 bytes are used to identify the archive itself, but the next block itself is pretty much standard. So our best guess is that some of that data was used to identify the file format, and that's why the scanning didn't work properly. Now, of course, just as a zip, we tried password protecting the single file, and it also worked. Now, every file inside the zip, inside the RAR archive, also has a version requirement for the software to extract it. And by setting the version requirement to 25, which is the FF and hex, we were successfully able to prevent some software vendors from decompressing such archives. Of course, the first file cannot be decompressed by any of the software that processes RAR archive, but the rest of the files in the archive work just fine. Now, cap file format. What we wanted to do is see if we could increase the compressed file size. So we set that size to 4 gigabytes, which is the maximum file size allowed by the cap file format. And this doesn't do anything for the cap processors because they don't rely on this information when they're creating the file. They're just decompressing data, and once they come to the terminator byte, they know the output file size, and they just write that. But if somebody was to try to allocate all this data, of course, their archive processor would break or just skip over the file thinking it's too large to contain any kind of malware and just skip scanning it. Now, for GZip file format, we just added the documented extra field. It's in the documentation, and it's really not commonly used. And that's why some software vendors had the problem of finding the start of the compressed data, which was shifted by a few bytes. And that's why the decompression didn't work. Now, for 7-zip, it has also, just like RAR archive, it has several blocks which describe the following content. And by setting the CRC of the header to an incorrect value, you would still have a valid archive which can be decompressed by 7-zip. But some security vendors were checking the CRC and telling, oh, this file is broken and we're not going to scan it. Now, this can be implemented like this. So, first header, which has these 4 fields, can be set to 0. And this only works if you have a single file in an archive, because then 7-zip will generically try to locate that particular compressed file, and it will succeed at that. And the other archive or processors found in security software wouldn't. Now, what are the conclusions of our testing? Files can be malformatted to carry hidden payload, and that hidden payload can affect the way we process archives, and in case of security, we won't be able to scan the whole archive. Now, malformatted files can also be automatically fixed, or by adding a generic decompression. Generic decompression routines to the archive processors, such as WinRAR has for zip file format. They can still be decompressed even though they don't look valid from the documentation standpoint. Now, of course, files can be malformatted to carry additional steganography content. And this hidden content has a self-destruct button. So if you are not careful enough in the process of repairing an archive or modifying anything, you would end up with losing the important data. Now, that brings us to our first demonstration. We're going to do some hex editing. We're going to hide existing files inside a zip archive. We're going to insert some hidden messages. We're going to invent our own file format, and we're going to show off the tool we used to check all this, and it's going to inject some Stego data inside an existing zip archive. So, let's do that. Okay, so the first thing is we wanted to show is this particular archive, which is the first VSA security advisor we posted. So it only has one particular file in it, and it's malware.bin. It's compressed configure sample, I believe. So its header is damaged, and you can see that just by looking at the hex output. As you see, first 2 bytes are zeros, and they're supposed to be the format signature, which is for zip pk. So we damaged that intentionally, and at the end, we added another file which is hidden, and you don't really see it. It's called zip insider. If you see that string right here, and since that file is hidden and it's not shown in the archive processors, that actually confused security software and thought that the archive was broken and didn't scan it in full. Now, some other fields were modified here. We're not going to go into that. This was documented in our white paper. Now, a tool used to create such an archive is called Zip Insider. We made such a program to test if we are correctly looking for the Stego content and if we are processing these archives correctly. Now I'm going to demonstrate how it works. The archive in question, this one riddle, already has a hidden content inside it. So just by calling Zip Insider, we can list all files that are hidden inside that particular archive. Of course, I've removed the hiding. So hide riddle. Okay. Now we see that we have found one file that was hidden. It's called file. It doesn't have an extension. Its size is 103 bytes. Has a certain CRC, of course. Now, that particular file is now hidden in the archive because the process was reversed. And if we wanted to show that particular archive, we would modify the archive itself in order to show that particular file in any program. So now we have modified the archive, and we can see that file. And that file is particularly a text file which says the answer to the hidden riddle is the riddle itself. You have to look closer to find your answer. This isn't the answer to the question why this file is so special. And I actually sent this to a couple of my guys, and they were able to find this file, but the rest of the puzzle was beyond them. So this was an example of hiding existing content inside an archive. But we have also injected additional content inside the archive itself. So if we use extract to get that new content to the disk, the file has been successfully extracted to the disk, and this is that injected content on the disk. As we see, the file is password protected, and it's another text file, and the password for it is, of course, riddle. And this is the answer to the question why this file is special. It's because we made it with the tool called Zip Insider. So as you can see, data can successfully be hidden inside an archive, and we can do all sorts of stuff with our tools to extract them back. Now, provided this particular tool both hides and reveals content, so it's only aware of its own mechanisms for hiding additional data. So we're going to talk about how we can generically detect any kind of hidden content a bit later. But now we're going to show a few more things. So another VSA we did is the 11.1. This is the one that uses the extra fields. So you can see that this particular file, which is also configure sample, right here, its file name is B, which should be 11 long, but we only declared it as 7. So first 7 letters of this word are file name, and the rest, as defined here, is just extra data. And by processing the header, Zip really needs to know where the next file in the archive is, and that's the size of that local header, plus the size of the name string, plus the size of the extra data, plus the size of the file comments. Now, since some software didn't process that correctly, they wouldn't be able to find the next file in line or the end of the archive. It's the same thing with the second version of the same vulnerability, but here we didn't hide the malicious sample. We have hidden the file before that. So by adding this extra 256 zeros, we were able to break some archive processors because we thought that some of them would generically search for the next entry in the central directory. So we added some space just to test out what's their tolerance for this kind of stuff. And as it turns out, it's 256 bytes. Now, talking about zip file format, this is that particular file, SFX file we talked about. So if I was to open this file with, let's say, WinRAR, the thing I would find is this image, which was appended to the SFX file. And that's my good friend Donkey. Now, if I was to start this SFX file, the data that would be extracted to, let's say, a new folder, wouldn't be a picture of my good friend, but it would be the malicious payload we compressed. So let's say new folder. So you see something happened. Okay. So inside the new folder, you have malware.bin, which is compressed configure sample. So the SFX executable itself knows the correct content to decompress, but because we are searching for this particular content from the end of an archive, we weren't able to find that back content. We found the picture of my good friend. Now, we could really go into detail of inventing our own file formats here, but we're not gonna because we are kind of low on time. What we're going to show is the modification of the SFX module. So inside the module, of course, there's an archive which needs to be decompressed, and we changed pretty much everything to the layout of the archive. Now, for the SFX module to be able to decompress that kind of content, it needs to be aware of the file format type. So the binary itself, the SFX module, was changed to recognize this new format we invented. And if you try to open this SFX executable with any software, it's going to tell you that it has no idea what it is, of course. But if we start it, we are able to decompress the protected content, and this is why no software that works with archives will be able to successfully decompress it. And here again is the configure sample. But we were surprised to find that some antivirus vendors were able to scan this particular archive. And the way that they did this is they looked for the compressed data itself. So we didn't change the compression algorithm or anything like that. We just changed how the headers look. And some antivirus vendors were able to detect that and decompress data correctly. So when talking about RAR file format, this is what we talked about. By declaring this first block as a temporary one, we can protect this archive from modification. So if I was to start this archive, it shows a configure sample. Just by adding a new file to it, we will successfully break it. And it's broken. So you can protect your archives from being modified like this if you really want to. But this process can be reversed. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So we just do a little bit of hex editing. No big deal. So we switched off that temporary flag. See the new size, which is now D. It's not 11. So D, and we really need to correct the header checksum for this particular bit. So we compute the hash. See that it's CF90, which was the default value. And if we save that, we will be able to see both the malicious payload and the one we have compressed, and the archive, of course, works. So this is reversible. Okay, that's the first demonstration. We have another one, but we got to get there. So to get there, we have to talk about the NyxEngine, and that's the tool we are presenting today. What's important about the NyxEngine is who is Nyx and why have we chosen her. So Nyx is the Greek goddess of night, and we thought it would be kind of fun if we have a Greek goddess of night watching over our files. So what does it do? It does the archive pre-processing, so this isn't an extracting tool, though it does have an ability to recover data. So recovery is done by extracting the data without really extracting. So the data you recover is still in the same format as the archive is. So if you recover damaged files from the zip, they're still zipped. You have to decompress them later, but their headers have been fixed, and you can use that kind of files. Now, it acts like an exploit shield. In the process of building this particular engine, we wanted to have an engine that's able to process the entire archive and look for these anomalies and skip over them and make us feel safe, because there were some exploits in the wild that acted like executing remote code in your machine if you were to process this kind of archive. So we wanted to be safe from this. We also wanted to be able to generically detect all hidden data inside it. Now, how can you use it? It's a free library. It comes with its SDK. It's going to be available on our website soon. It has a Nyx console, which is an example of how to use an SDK. And we converted it to a plugin for Total Commander and Power Archiver. So if they cannot process the archive, our plugin is going to step in and enable you to view the content and recover the data. Now, the functional groups are, of course, we support identification of these 4 file formats. It's zip, rar, cap, and GZip. We enable content browsings, which means you can traverse the archive one file at a time. So just by calling get next file, for example, you would be able to go through each and every file we found in the archive. You also get all the information possible about the pack content, so the compressed size, decompressed size, file time, file date, attributes, is it password protected, is the name Unicode, everything about the archive. Does it split to multiple volumes? Everything about the archive that is present in the headers and valid, we give back to the user. We also do archive validation. So what we wanted to know is if the archive was corrupted, and if it was corrupted beyond recovering. So this is a pretty simple process in which we determine if the damage is beyond any kind of useful data recovery, and the output you get is either yes, the archive is valid. No, it's not valid, but yes, you can fix it. Or the archive is so broken that there's no use of doing anything with this file. Now, we also did, of course, search for steganography content, and we did this generically. So the idea behind it is to generically support any kind of Stego implementation done to the archive. And we do this by basically mapping out the file and seeing which parts of the archive are attributed to the packed content. If there's anything between the packed content, then we report that. And we check if that's a piece of the same archive or another archive, and you are able to recover that. Now, why this isn't as simple as just adding numbers of the packed files and see if that matches the archive? Because that doesn't include headers. If you were to add the value of the packed file inside an archive and just add them all together and see if that matches the file size, you would be still missing quite a few bytes that are attributed to the file header itself. So by attributing all of the data and seeing what's between that, we are able to detect generically any kind of data injection inside the archive itself. And of course, I failed to mention is that unpacked size and compressed size don't really matter for some archivers. So you can have that as that's not a given information. So you can't really rely on that. You have to check the data itself. Now, of course, if we have found the corrupted content, we are able to salvage most of it. Now, one of the most useful features of this engine, besides finding hidden data, is pre-processing archives, which protects you from all sorts of exploits. So if you have an SDK for, let's say, WinRAR, and you use NyxEngine in front of it, you are sure not to be exploited by something that's not patched by the vendor, because we check the file name length and content, because that was most commonly used to trigger exploits in the archival processors. Because if you have a string that's longer than max path on Windows, you would probably overwrite some buffer and have some sort of an exploit. But recently, that has been fixed in every archival processor except GZip, which had such an exploit a few days ago. Now, we look for suspicious compression ratio. In order to check for archive bombs, which are nasty, we check if the compression ratio matches the actual data. So if you have something that's compressed, let's say 1 byte, and it says that when it's decompressed it needs 4 gigabytes of space, that's of course a bogus information. So we check for this kind of attacks, because we found that some archival processes would try to allocate all this data, and since they were unable to, they would either slow down the machine or just break entirely. Now, we check for the extract algorithm requirements. Now, this doesn't need continuous updates from our side. It's just something that generically detects if a piece of information is valid or not. So if for example, for WinRAR, when we said the version 25 is needed to extract this particular file, we generically detect that as a bogus information, so we don't really need to update that and say the latest version is that, everything beyond that is a bogus info. We found that some checks on tampering is possible, which prevents some software vendors from decompressing the archive. If we talk about Zip, it has a central directory record and a local one, and if that data doesn't match, then something is off. And the way this works is that some vendors use the central directory information to decompress data and some local. So you can have an archive which is extractable by some programs, but not by others, because they're using different points of reference. Now, of course, there's some stuff you can do to, let's say, the archive splits to, let's say, 20 volumes when it doesn't. We also check for that. We check for, and this is interesting, file entry duplication, because nowhere in the specs it says you cannot have 2 files with the same name and extension in the archive. Yes, the archival programs will not enable you to do that, but nothing stops you from creating such an archive. So if you have a tool that is basically a command line and you set it to, I will overwrite any file I found, so the first file will be overwritten by the second one, which is duplicated. And we do all sorts of header checks just to make sure that everything is according to spec, but not only according to spec, what we have seen that works in the wild as well. Now, for every exploit or vulnerability we find, we provide detailed description with the link to our advisory, which you can read and see how the exploit works. Now, we've come to the demo of our engine. We will test the NyxEngine on some of our VSAs, and we will test this on Stego implementation, and we will show how to recover data. So if you cannot see this, but you have a laptop in front of you, you can go to youtube.com/ReversingLabs and see this video better. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a couple of files to create a zip archive. So let's do it like this. We're going to compress my good friend here to a zip archive. It doesn't matter which processor you use. Let's say this should work fine. And there we have a zip archive that only contains that particular image. Now, if we use steganography tools we talked about earlier, so one of them, which seems to work best, is GZip Steganography by Karney. So if we were to open such a file, which we just created, there. We opened it, and it only has one file. That's my good friend. And we will add a couple more files. So let's add Nix documentation, and let's just add it as a hidden file. And let's add another file, which is, let's say, this malware, which is a configure sample. And by saving changes, we have successfully created an archive which contains hidden content. We can validate this just by opening an archive and see it's only my good friend there. And then we can open the same archive with the program again to see if it's able to reverse the process. So we just open Stego. And as we've seen, there's a visible file called JPEG and two other hidden files inside an archive. I'm going to show you how that looks like with the hex editor. So the donkey itself is visible, but everything else isn't. So if you look at the end, it only has one particular entry, it's donkey. But if we go in reverse and see this all data and just search from beginning for a PK signature, there's one. This is fake. This is fake. Okay, I think we found it. Yeah. And as we've seen, there is another local header which contains malware.bin. And that particular data is stored just behind the first compressed file, which is donkey, and the central directory. So it's all injected. And let's see how this Stego file is processed with our NyxEngine. So it has a couple of parameters. First, we want to scan the archive itself to see what's in it. And as we see, there's a lot of data. So what we found is we only have one reported file, so total number of files is 1. That's donkey.zip. But we detected some vulnerabilities. We detected the possible attack due to presence of non-standard header data. That's the extra field modification. The possible vulnerability due to different data in local and central directory entries. And by doing a detailed inspection for steganography content, we found the following. We found a detected file unreported by the archive header. It starts at that particular offset. We can go there in the hex editor and see how it looks like. And there it is, there's a header for our document. And it says the size of the file found. And the next one starts at, we shoved that. We don't really need to go there anyway. So the question is, once we know it's there, what do we do with it? Now, what we do is we do an interactive scan of the archive itself. So we interactively scan Stego, and it says, okay, I found the first file. Do you want to recover it? We say yes. What do you want to recover it to? Let's say recover 1.zip. Find another file. Do you want to recover that? Yes. Recover 2.zip. And the program has finished. So let's see that particular file. So first one recovered. We are unable at the moment to recover the file name, so we use a generic one in case the file name is obfuscated or something like that. But the data itself is valid. And if we open that, we see that this particular file, which is a doc file, we can open it. It's a valid zip file. So this thing can be just renamed to the zip archive because that is what it is. It's a zip inside a zip. You can extract that data and see it later, of course. And for the second one, if we just view it, we see the MZ signature, which is default for applications, and this is a configure sample, so we're not going to extract this onto our disk, but as we can see, we can recover all data. So we can try this engine on any of the advisories we gave, and it's going to report all the information about the vulnerabilities we've just disclosed. So let's try this 11. So just scan the file 11, and it says possible steganography detected as a clear text data, and it gives you an offset and the size of the data detected. So it's kind of a fuzzy area where Stego ends and where vulnerability begins, because if it's just Stego and it's affecting some software security vendors, it's a fuzzy area. You can't really declare it as a vulnerability if it's in accord to the documentation. So we were kind of struggling with some just to file them as a right thing, but we are able to detect both vulnerabilities, steganography, and corruptions with our tool. So what's important is that we have embedded not only these 15 vulnerabilities we found, we embedded 30 more we found in the process of coding this tool. However, there's no description for that because we haven't really disclosed them yet. You're just going to skip over that content and play like the archive is valid. Once we disclose this, and this is going to be this or the following month, then the tool is going to get updated and you will see what the vulnerabilities were. But it's a process. It's 30 new vulnerabilities, and since the last 15 were patched, and some of the vendors are still rolling out patches, we want to make sure that we have 30 new and not something that was a residue from the old ones. So if it was patched, it's no good. What we found is that we were doing testing in association with VirusTotal, so we were using their scanners to do that. And what we found that this wasn't really a good idea because some of the security vendors have command line tools there that haven't had their engines updated in a while. So what we did now is have our results from VirusTotal and just manually verify that if that's going to affect your desktop solution. So the data in the vulnerability advisories we get now is much more accurate. And that's it for the NyxEngine. That's it for our presentation. We come to the question part. So any questions? Come on, guys, there's got to be one question.
How come you're not able to recover the file names? Because it was clearly in there. So.
Yeah, we didn't add that part yet. It was a short coding period, and we only wanted to make the archive valid, so you can recover the data, file name. You can get that from the archive itself if you want to. But we will add that feature in a couple of weeks, sure. Anything else? Yeah.
What amount of data can you hide in these zip files without?
Any amount of data. If I was to hide a particular file in it, I would definitely change the uncompressed size of the file before that. And so it all adds up. And you would have absolutely no idea that there's some hidden content in it. For CAB, it even works better because CAB uses a single stream to compress all data. And if you just change the numbers of the uncompressed size, it really has no effect at all. Anything else?
The NyxEngine tool. When I'm searching for data on broken drive, some kind of recovery tool,
Okay.
it doesn't matter if it is a drive or device or file. Is the way how it finds the file similar to what NyxEngine uses?
The NyxEngine opens the file you provide it to. So if you provide a zip archive, it identifies that as a zip archive. If it is really a zip, it doesn't matter which extension it is. We do data checks to make sure, and then just inspect that content.
But does it expect zip archive as a zip archive or as a raw binary search?
Raw binary searches for the signature, and we identify that as either zip, RAR, GZip, or CAB, which is supported at the moment. Okay. Anything else?
What's happening if I encrypt or password protect the zip file? Does this then work? Or
Yes. You get a response which says this particular file is protected by a password. You can see that in the console. That's an information we provide with the data about the file, because this is an SDK. You can embed this anywhere. That was the basic idea. But it doesn't decrypt files or anything. In the process of recovery, you really don't need to do that. You use another tool to break the password.
So if I want to analyze my zip files, if there are some hidden data in it, I need to decrypt it or to unprotect it first?
First, you do the recovery part, and then it creates a totally new archive with a valid header. It still stores the information about the password, so you are able to use a brute forcer to recover the password itself on the newly created but valid archive.
Even if the original one is password protected?
Yeah. It depends on how the Stego is implemented, because this particular program we showed, it embeds new data but still a zip file inside it. So when we recover that, that's another zip file. It doesn't matter. But some tools just do inject the data. They don't compress it. They just encrypt it with a random password. And you will get a detection from our tool, and it's going to say, okay, there's some data from here to here. We have no idea what it is. Go check yourself. And when you do, you can either see if that's junk data, plain text, or something that looks encrypted. And then you can apply your cryptography tools to work with that kind of stuff. But the main issue we had is just finding the data, because this is all novel, and we have absolutely no idea how prevalent this is in the wild, because nobody really checked. Yes?
I'm just trying to get this clear. So the whole idea is, so let's say someone has your tool.
Okay.
Then they'll be able to find
Hidden content, no matter what.
Okay, so the idea is, as long as you don't have that tool, no one's able to detect that there's hidden data.
As I said, it works generically, so it doesn't matter which kind of Stego tool you use to hide files, it will still be able to detect hidden data. It won't be able to tell you how it was hidden, but it will tell you from here to here there's hidden data. And you use a software engineer to check for that data and see what it is.
And I guess your question was what do security tools do with it, right? And I mean, they're then affected by the various vulnerabilities because they're reading the file as a file format, trying to figure out the versions, and may detect it or may not, depending on how you do the malformation or Stego implementation.
Yeah.
So, like for example, these vulnerabilities, and for our FTK product, we basically made sure that we don't fall. Sort of as we open up each of the archives, we look at it and we're like, we don't sort of fall prey to some of those types of things. So we'll explore into them. We don't say, oh, this has got this going on. It just sort of breaks into the file without sort of being like, oh, there's a header that's messed up here. Oh, there's something appended. Let's ignore it. It just breaks into it. Yeah. So instead of it being a detection mechanism, it's more of just get into the data.
My initial understanding was this is actually like you're proposing a technique to hide data, but you're actually proposing a tool to
discover any kind of data. So we are not worried about any kind of steganography implication because we can generically detect anything. So that's what we try to do. And from the software security standpoint, it really doesn't matter what kind of data is hidden because if the user doesn't know about it, he cannot be infected, of course. Yes?
Is it possible to hide data in field headers?
Yeah, of course it is.
But when you calculate the amount of data and try to find out missing pieces, does it take into account?
Yes, it takes account every byte in the file. So if you have one byte that's not accounted for by the archive documentations or the archive file format, it's detected and it says, okay, from here to here there's a byte. We are not sure if it's a part of the file. You have no idea. You have to check yourself. But we did a lot of testing and we've complied with every documentation there is about every format. So we are sure that things you are detecting won't be the part of the archive itself. It will be something extra injected. Questions? So, any more questions, guys? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.